Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the powerful and honestly super sophisticated kingdoms of pre-colonial southern Africa. We're talking about a story of incredible fortress empires and bustling urban centers that you might not know about.
Okay, so here's our roadmap. First, we're going to challenge how we think about these kingdoms. Then, we'll get into the military genius of the Pedi and the amazing urban planning of the Tswana. After that, we'll look at what held their societies together, and finally, wrap up with their last struggles and what they've left behind. For way too long, the history of this region has been kind of oversimplified. So right off the bat, we're going to start by challenging some of those old narratives and really take a fresh look.
So let me ask you, what does a powerful, sophisticated kingdom look like in your mind? Is it an unbreachable mountain fortress? Or maybe a thriving city buzzing with industry? Well, this explainer is going to show you two incredible and totally different answers to that question from the Pedi and Tswana peoples. They built societies that were, seriously, every bit as complex as their contemporaries anywhere else in the world. So, let's jump into our first case study, the Pedi Kingdom. This was a formidable military power, an empire built on brilliant defensive strategy and some serious economic smarts, all centered on the powerful Maratang dynasty. At its absolute zenith, under a leader named Chief Tholer, the Pedi forged this dominant empire. They used a combination of strategic raids and raw military power to control a huge territory and basically command the loyalty of many of the groups around them. After Tolare, the story gets even more intense. His eventual successor, Sekhukhune I, would become an absolute legend of resistance. He actually seized power from his own half-brother, so there was all this family drama, but he quickly got down to business, turning the Leolo Mountains into a fortress and gearing up for what he knew was coming: conflict with the colonial powers. And his strategy, look at this. It was just brilliant. This wasn't just about building walls. It was a sophisticated economic plan. He basically used the colonial economy against itself. He sent his young men to work in European mines and farms, earn wages, and then use that cash to buy modern firearms. It was a genius way to create a well-armed, modern military. And make no mistake, his power was undeniable. His resistance was so successful, especially when his forces defeated the Boers in 1876, that even the British press, which, let's be honest, almost never covered African leaders, had to sit up and take notice. They literally wrote about him in the London Times. Okay, now let's completely shift gears. We're going to explore a totally different but just as sophisticated way of building power. This is what the Tswana kingdoms developed. Their strength wasn't hidden away in mountain fortresses, it was out in the open, in these large, incredibly organized urban centers. And this really shows you the key difference in how they structured their society. While many neighboring groups, like the Nguni, lived in scattered, family-based homesteads, the Tswana did the opposite. They concentrated their people, building these huge urban centers that we call agro-towns. And these weren't just big villages, they were bustling economic hubs. Seriously, they had specialized industries. Cities like Kgotla were famous for making high-quality iron and copper goods. They were major players in long-distance trade, swapping their local products for goods from as far away as Asia. But just because they were city dwellers didn't mean they neglected defense. Not at all. A lot like the Pedi Tswana leaders, like the great King Makaba II, were masters of strategic geography. They fortified hilltops like Kanye with these impressive stone walls to protect their thriving communities. So you've got these huge, complex urban societies. The big question is, how do they hold it all together? Well, let's get into their really unique systems of government and their social philosophy. So, right at the heart of Tswana society was this deeply democratic institution called the Kgotla. Think of it as a central public assembly, a place where anyone could come to debate, settle disputes, and make decisions for the whole community. This powerful proverb just captures the spirit of the Kgotla perfectly, doesn't it? It wasn't about shouting down your opponents. It was about making sure that every single voice, no matter how unpopular their opinion, had a right to be heard. And this entire system was guided by the philosophy of Botho, which you might know as Ubuntu. It's this profound belief in our shared humanity, our interconnectedness. The goal in the Kgotla wasn't for one side to win. It was to reach a consensus. You kept talking until you found a solution the entire community could agree on, because social harmony was the ultimate prize.
But as you can probably guess, this incredible era of powerful, independent kingdoms, whether they were mountain fortresses or huge agro-towns, was ultimately challenged. They faced a perfect storm of internal rivalries and the overwhelming force of colonial expansion. For the Pedi, the story just ends in tragedy. After being defeated and imprisoned, Sekhukhune was eventually released, only to be murdered by his own half-brother, Mumprue II. This bitter family feud, which had been simmering for years, ultimately destroyed both brothers and their kingdom. Just to give you a sense of what the Pedi were up against in that final assault, 12,000. That was the size of the combined British and Swazi army sent to storm Sekhukhune's capital. It was a colossal force designed to make sure there was no victory, no escape. After years and years of fierce and often successful resistance, the sheer numbers were just too much to handle. The mountain strongholds were finally breached, and with the capture of their king, the once mighty Pedi Empire was shattered. And that brings us to a really crucial question, right? When the empires fall, when the walls crumble, what's actually left? What endures? Well, it turns out the ideas were more resilient than the stone walls. Those principles of community, of dialogue, of governing by consensus that we saw in the Kgotla and the philosophy of Ubuntu, they live on. They are still powerful, influential forces in southern Africa today. And that leaves us with a final thought. In a world that so often feels fractured and divided, what can these sophisticated historical systems teach us? What can we learn from the principles of deep listening and searching for consensus to shape our own communities for the better?